Awesome. Welcome, everyone. We're so glad you're here, and thank you for joining our exclusive customer webinar, Beyond Awareness, Advanced Tips for Securing Humans. As an OrbitalFire customer, I'm sure many of you have seen our tips for creating a stronger culture of security in your organization, and you may have even seen previous webinars that we've done on this topic. Today, though, our speaker, Reg Harnish, who I believe many, if not all of you know, will really go beyond the basics and dig deeper into this important topic. And with that, Reg, I think we can. Great. So just want to talk about a couple of upcoming webinars in July are very important. S'mores for the cybersecurity nerd, top tips for sticky faces. No, we take a break in July for all the summer vacations, but we will definitely be back in September for Mind the Gaps, a small business guide to smarter vulnerability management. There'll be more information as it gets closer coming on for that. And that's one in particular that's going to be really great. We're going to, ask you if you have an MSP, internal IT department. We think this would be a really great one for them to join you on. All right, and as I mentioned, we've got Reg here today that's going to speak on this topic.
Great. Thank you everyone for being here. I know it's beautiful. Actually, it's getting warm in this office, so I'm probably look a little shiny right now from the heat. It's probably 75 in the office, but excited and one of my favorite topics, honestly, really going back to the beginning of my career, recognizing a few things that I think as most folks in cybersecurity don't, that risks may come from places where we least expect them. The story has changed over the last 20 years. But we want to dig into a few of the things that we have learned over the last, let's say 5 years or so, about changing behaviors in small business employees and workforce, and share those here with you. This is a customer exclusive webinar, so we do have a little bit of inside knowledge about how your programs are performing, generally speaking. Another thing that maybe we do another webinar on in like maybe the end of the summer is we're working on a data intelligence effort here internally. Many of you have said, hey, my compliance, my training compliance is 88%, but how am I doing compared to all of my peers or competitors or other folks in my industry? And we are mining all of that data in the near term here. We're going to start to be able to present a lot of that off the subject, but certainly relevant here as we get into sharing information with our customers about how we're doing collectively. But let's start with a few questions here. I'll ask Dana to read the survey questions. So the first, are you satisfied with your current program? Of course, we're probably helping most of you with whether it's training or testing, skills assessment. Many of you, we have done things like games and competitions, but it's a work in progress. Honestly, most of us, and if you ask most of our team, we're probably not happy with where you are today. Not even if your numbers are, 88, 90, 92, 100%. We do have customers who are consistently at 100% compliance and very low testing scores, which is good. But generally speaking, this is something that's a moving target, and people are fickle and they change, and everything affects them, from what's happening in politics to things that's happening in their personal lives. Maybe they're moving, maybe they bought a dog. So it's a moving target. But it looks like most of you are fairly satisfied with where you are today, which is great to hear. Of course, no, I don't have any problems with that for sure. Number two is, right, are you satisfied with current efforts to integrate the program into your culture? One of the conversations that we try to have, and maybe we don't have it often enough, is how do we do two things? One, take elements from your culture. Oftentimes that's your values, if you have established those, and stitch those into your awareness, your workforce security program. Because the more we can align with your culture, and whether that's you're, a large bank or you're a small landscaper, everyone is a different culture, but the better we can align with some of the things that are already intrinsic in that space, in the feeling of working there and the experience, the more successful we're going to be, because we minimize those barriers to adoption and engagement. But another thing is, we're not only pulling things out of your culture, we want to put things back. So in thinking about this, part of this is about how are we building the program, right? This is a new layer of security for many. What content are we using? What tone? What frequency? What day of the week do we deliver this training on? How are we testing people? How are we publishing results and performance? All of these additional elements need to be considered, because your culture is also influenced by some of the things that we're doing in cybersecurity. So a real recognition and appreciation for the things that can change your culture, but also that we can leverage from your culture, but all in the spirit of changing behaviors and improving security outcomes. That's really what all of this comes down to. So a couple of things, and we will get into the good stuff. I want to really talk a little bit about where we are today. And most of you know that I don't appreciate oftentimes a lot of the statistics and headlines that come out of our industry. And oftentimes I find myself apologizing for things that the cybersecurity industry does and says. But I do want to point out a few things. First is that my industry, the cybersecurity industry at large, blames all risks on human beings. Now, while I generally agree with the statement, I don't agree with their intent. For the cybersecurity industry, they generally completely ignore all non-email risks. So when the cybersecurity industry says that people are the greatest risk, it's because people are clicking links in email, they're opening attachments, they're visiting compromised or infected websites, and certainly those can be problems. We've all seen it or experienced it firsthand. But what they fail to mention is that while every cybersecurity risk does come down to a human being, most of them have nothing to do with email. It's poorly written code. It's poorly configured firewalls or devices. It's people who are overly helpful. Maybe they're in the back of the office holding the smoking door open for a stranger, because we all want to be helpful. So to clarify, I agree that every cybersecurity risk comes down to a human being, but not in the way our industry wants you to think. They really want you to focus on human beings interacting with email and the internet. And again, those can present huge challenges, huge risks for organizations. But the vast majority, that is just the tip of the iceberg. The vast majority of these problems come before you ever even get to the office. And so I wanted to explore a few of those, but I really want to start to dig into how you can start to affect real behavioral change in your workforce, just doing a couple of things. That said, I think it's important to recognize a few things before we get started. The first here, right? So if you believe the industry, almost every cybersecurity incident that we respond to today has some kind of human element in it, right? We didn't notice a suspicious sender's email address. We visited a known bad website. Could be a lot of different things. I don't know if this statistic is true or not, but we do certainly understand and recognize that a lot of the events that we respond to and help our customers with, a human being is absolutely in the center of this. Someone didn't apply their skills, someone wasn't paying attention, someone was in a hurry, or maybe someone just wasn't developed to a point where they could recognize certain issues. So while this number may not be correct, we know it's a big one, and we also know that it's not getting better. I would argue that despite a flood a highly saturated awareness training industry. We really haven't made a lot of progress over the last 20 years. I feel like we're still fighting a lot of the same challenges. We're seeing a lot of the same risks and outcomes. Now, a lot of that comes down to our genetics and our evolution and our DNA. So let me just prove this to you. I'm going to ask a question. You'll answer in your head. I already know the answer, but I want to talk a little bit about why this happens. So here's the question. It's beautiful out today, right? I'm sure everyone is thinking about when's my next vacation? When can I get out of the office? When can I get to the beach? Now, when you go to the beach, are you more afraid of sharks or of vending machines? I'll give you a second, but I already know the answer. Of course, all of us are more afraid of sharks, right? Big, scary. We've seen the headlines. We've seen the pictures of gnawed off limbs as a result of someone being in the wrong place at the wrong time, right? Sharks are scary. Shark Week, we have entire months that we dedicate to shark bites and shark attacks. So of course we're more afraid of sharks. Now, what if I was told you if you were 7,000 times as likely to be killed by a vending machine at the beach than you are a shark? Now, what are you more afraid of? Well, unfortunately, you're still more afraid of sharks. Data doesn't matter in this case. And that happens because our brain has been programmed over millennia to process data and stimuli in a certain way that produces generally successful outcomes. Great example, right? Don't chase lions, or don't touch the fire, or the list goes on. So we as a species have been very successful for 250,000 years, leveraging something that we call the limbic system, or better known as the lizard brain. Now, the lizard brain is very powerful. It controls a lot of our emotions, our thoughts. It's central to our instincts, which are all really part of that cybersecurity decision-making wheel and how we interpret all of these stimuli and interactions. But the limbic system also has some very powerful issues, and we call these cognitive biases. So data-driven, but decision-based issues and risks that we introduce in our lives. So some of them might be, one of them, for example, is the confirmation bias. So we tend to believe things that we already suspect are true. Another one is the, and I'm going to forget the name, and I have forgotten the name, but another one is the whatever bias it is. But essentially, we downplay risks that are commonplace, and we tend to overestimate risks that are fantastical or unique or rare. Going back to the shark and the vending machine, there's nothing fancy about being killed by a vending machine, right? You put in your money, your product doesn't come out, you shake it, it falls over on you, and you're dead. Nothing fancy about that. It's never going to make a headline. But a shark attack, unique, rare, fantastical headline, right? If it bleeds, it leads. We see these stories, and our brain automatically miscalculates the risk of those things because of those characteristics. So again, things like texting while driving. We could see 100 headlines a day for issues, accidents, and deaths, fatalities that are directly related to texting while driving. But it's boring. Like, we see that all the time. It's not news. And so we tend to downplay those risks. We tend to overestimate risks that are fantastic. Another bias is one where we tend to downplay risks that we have control over. And we tend to overestimate risks that are out of our control. Things like terrorism, where if you go back and you look at, over the last 250,000 years that our species has existed, the number of human beings that have been lost to terrorism is actually minuscule, almost statistically zero if you round to the nearest whole number. And then again, things that are in our control, like texting while driving, we underestimate those risks because, again, we have complete control over that. And we could go on and on. There are like 16 to 20 of these different cognitive biases that are processed and live in our lizard brain, our limbic system, And all of those are central to the decision-making process in cybersecurity because it's very emotional and it's very instinctual. Now, anyone who's been through therapy like I have knows that I'm pretty much just the 7-year-old version of myself trying to make it in a 55-year-old body. Actually, I'm 56 now. And because of that, we resist new skills, we resist learning, we resist, right? No one likes change. And so as human beings, we're predisposed to be terrible at adopting new strategies or practicing new behaviors. And that's because we're really sort of hovering around this and orbiting around this 7-year-old version of ourselves, right? If you look at most studies, they suggest that 90% of the learning that you will do, including language, motor skills, is done by the time you're 7 years old. And so now teaching people new tricks, right? Old dog, new tricks becomes challenging because our brain, once again, is working against us. And that becomes an issue if we're not effective in our approach. Now, the good news in all of this is that most people, in fact, I would argue more than 90% of the employees that work at our customers, and now we're talking about 12,000, 13,000, 14,000 people, virtually all of them have the skills to recognize a scam or a phishing email or a social engineering attempt or a compromised website. Now, what we don't have is the incentive to take the 2.1 seconds that's required to apply those skills. So think about that for a second. We all have this knowledge. We are all adequately prepared to defend ourselves and our companies, but we're in a hurry, or it's not a priority, or I'm upset with my supervisor, or it's Monday. Whatever the reason is, you're not applying the skills that you have. And this is what we find to be the biggest problem, the single most biggest problem in cybersecurity today for small businesses, is people who are in a hurry, compromising, not following their process, cutting corners, or for whatever reason, unlikely to do the things that they already know how to do because they don't have the 2 seconds or they're unwilling to use those 2 seconds to apply those skills. So our job becomes less about skills development, professional development, and more about awareness and motivation, incentive. And we're going to talk a little bit about how we see that working in our customers and hopefully a couple of new ideas that you can use today, or certainly we're willing to use with you. You've heard us all talk about, yes, we're doing monthly, training, monthly skills assessments, monthly testing. That's really just the foundation of the program. There are so many other tactics and tips and practices that we can leverage to start to change behaviors through motivation, through incentive, and by making people part of the solution. So let's get into a few of these. I really want to dig in before we take some questions. The first is about expectations. I remember the first time that I ever visited the Pentagon in Crystal City, DC-ish, Virginia. And when I got off the metro, and anyone who's been there knows that it's a pretty impressive place, even before you get inside. I got off the metro, and you can walk from the DC metro right to the Pentagon. So I made that trip, and I was there on a contract and doing some work. When I got there, I immediately felt the presence and the seriousness and the commitment that the Pentagon and the DoD had to security. And whether it was the automatic rifles, armed guards stationed at the doors, whether it was language and the words that they used on some of the placards and signs, or the direction, or seeing cameras, it was palpable just how seriously they took all of this. We need to set those same expectations with our workforce. And it does not mean that we have to scare them or create this overwhelming presence, but rather make it very clear for them that this is what we do here in cybersecurity. We take it very seriously. And so whether you're risk tolerant or you're risk intolerant, doesn't really matter. Everyone is going to absorb that culture and those expectations, whether you like it or not. So now it's our job to set those clearly. Some of the ways we do that, the basics, like an onboarding video, a message from the CEO or someone else in leadership that talks about how serious you take cybersecurity. It could be a survey. It could be a review of your job descriptions as they relate to protecting data. But setting those expectations right up front, and then of course committing to those and carrying through becomes critically important. Part of setting that expectation clearly means good communication. So being very precise about the words that we use or don't use. When do we talk about it? Who do we talk about it to? How is it enforced? All of these things become important. And of course, the deeper that we stitch these expectations into the mechanics of the business, right? The people mechanics, like a job description or a performance evaluation, or someone who's recognized in a company newsletter for being a champion of awareness. And there's 100 other examples. But the more that we do this, the more people absorb the culture. They absorb the expectations. So yes, absolutely, we want to make sure that we are delivering deliberate communications that are intended to send a message about cybersecurity. But a lot of this is going to come from their peers, like having a conversation with their cubby mate, or just the kinds of things that are overheard at the water cooler, or how we respond to events and incidents. All of these things become the ambient fluid that we all operate in from a cybersecurity standpoint. So the more of this that can be present, the better. So what we're looking for is not one big announcement at the beginning of someone's career, but rather many, many, many tiny announcements or interactions or events or communications. This is something that we want to be ambient. We want it to be like the air that your workforce is breathing. They should see security, your version of security, everywhere. Again, I want to make this clear that this does not mean that you have to be at 100% compliance. It does not mean that you have to be the Pentagon. What it means is when you define how your cybersecurity program is going to look and what your expectations are of your workforce, that people see, interact, and feel those everywhere. Those expectations cannot be more critical, and setting that expectation right up front is very important. Or as they say, it's tough to make a good second impression. Another way we can do this is actually rather counterintuitive if we speak to most people. There's really two things. The first is, as you're developing your program or enhancing, or I know we've used the term an intervention or a relaunch of your workforce security program, all of which are huge opportunities to do something different. What we want to do is include our users in the relaunch or the intervention. We want to find out what's really working here. What time of day is best to deliver those trainings, or what day, how frequently? We have ultimate flexibility in terms of how, where, when, why, and what we deliver in terms of the awareness and phishing services, the workforce security program. So let's find out from them. Let's actually ask them, what do you appreciate? As we're building the program, let's survey our users. Hey, do you find YouTube style animations more interesting and engaging? Or would you rather watch a movie, a Hollywood style action movie? Well, we're going to get good information from them. And on top of probably a better program, a more finely tuned program, when people get engaged or they're involved or you ask them their opinion, they now have more skin in the game. This is my program now because I'm providing feedback and I'm making some of these decisions about what kind of content and does it come on Thursday or Tuesday? And all of that becomes skin in the game. The more you can make users part of the solution, the more bought in they're going to be inherently. Because why? Well, because their lizard brain won't let them do anything else. Being engaged, being involved means I am more satisfied naturally with the things that happen in that area. But the second piece is And something that I see our industry getting wrong all the time is if someone fails a phishing test or underperforms on a skills assessment or is not compliant, they're 3 months behind on their training, our immediate instinct is to bring out the stick. But this program should not be presented as punitive in any way. In fact, we've worked with customers to say, hey, let's present this as a free skill, like a free upskilling, like something you can put on your resume. Like you're the recognized awareness champion at your company for 2024, whatever it is. We're providing free skills, free training, free enhancements, stuff that you can use at home to protect your family, in your car, anywhere. And so I think we often take a more more of a top-down approach to delivering the program. But also, if people are failing, if your workforce is underperforming, if we're not hitting our goals, our first instinct is to punish people. And that is exactly the opposite of what we really want to do. In those cases, so if you're thinking to yourself, hey, I'm not super happy with where my program is, I'd like to, improve these numbers. The first thing you want to do is get people involved. Go talk to the people who are failing and sincerely ask them, what is it about this training that you can't find 3.5 minutes a month to take? It's free. It's skills for you. You can protect your family. It's funny. It's engaging. It's short. And ask them, what is it about the training? Or if you're constantly failing phishing tests, like what is happening here? We really want to learn from you. So rather than making it punitive, go and make an example of them. And maybe in your next company communications about this topic, you could say, hey, listen, we were making some mistakes in our program, but we went and talked to, Alan in accounting, and he gave us some really great feedback because it wasn't working for him. And we've made some changes and we think it's going to be good for him. That kind of messaging is hugely powerful, but it's all because people are involved. You're asking them their opinion, you care about how they feel, and you want to make them successful. That automatically triggers that limbic system to say, hey, this is my program. So everyone remembers moving out of their parents' house where your bedroom, at home was a mess until you got your own apartment and it was spick and span. Well, it's because it was yours. Same thing with the way you drove your vehicle. If it was your parents, you didn't really care. But if it was your own car, the one you were paying for and insuring, well, you drove a little more alertly. And that's just the way human beings operate. And we cannot help operating. This is a Jedi mind trick because this is already programmed into us. Get them involved at every stage of your program continuously. And maybe there's a committee, maybe there's a work group where once or twice a year you talk about your awareness program, really dig into the performance and start to relaunch these programs with better ideas. Going back to the punitive aspects of the industry, there are some things that give us an inherent implicit advantage when we're working with human beings. In most cases, your performance is private, right? So if I failed that phishing test last month, no one's going to know except for me, maybe OrbitalFire, maybe someone from my company who's managing the program. But generally speaking, that failure is between us. It's a secret. Just like my overperformance. And if I have, knocked it out of the park and I'm at 100% compliance every month and I've never failed a phishing, well, guess what? That's also a secret, which I'm not happy about that part. But for us, we know that all you have to do is publish the results of where everyone is. Now, there are a couple of tricks that are important. So the first is we want to reward individually and we want to correct as a group. So if we're doing it publicly, we're never going to say, hey, Janice from Human Resources continues to drop the ball here. We're going to say, hey, listen, and it's just going to be a score. Human Resources is at 36% and the executive team is at 55. It's right there. You don't have to say a word. Just by publishing the results, people draw their own conclusions. No one likes to be at the bottom of the list, and everyone wants a gold star. Everyone. We all want to be recognized as human beings. And again, this is about understanding our cognitive biases and the way we make decisions and what influences us and incents us and motivates us. Because if you have someone who has overperformed or done a great job for you for 6 months and then they fail a month, that could be devastating for them. And they're absolutely going to be looking for that next phishing test. Or in real life, they're going to be practicing better security behaviors, right? They're going to be spending the 2 seconds that are required. So I know we talked to a lot of you about how important communications is on a regular basis from people that oftentimes you may not expect. We love seeing communications from someone who's not on the cybersecurity team, or maybe not in leadership, but maybe someone telling a story about what happened to their checking account at home, or they got a letter from their credit union about how their information was compromised and telling that story. We want to make sure that we are mixing things up. People already expect that it's going to be the CEO or the head of human resources to send these communications out. So let's mix it up. But oftentimes, all it takes is a very simple spreadsheet that lists the top performers and the bottom performers. And again, there are some tricks. We're not here to hurt anyone's feelings, and we don't want to make this punitive. But oftentimes, just making the data available can solve a lot of your problems for you. Now, while humans are at the center of every cybersecurity risk, truly, they truly are, not everyone introduces the same risk as everyone else. And so this idea of maturing your program, at some point, we're going to get to this idea of risk profiling. So if you've been with us for more than, let's say, a year and your program needs some maturing, you've probably heard of us talking about low risk, high risk, and medium risk employees, users. And so now we want to start to address the risk side of this by understanding that if you have a company, 40% of which is out driving a truck or assessing a gauge somewhere, or in the field cleaning an office. It could be a lot of different things. Those low risk users, even if they're underperforming, present less risk to us than something like your controller, or someone who can wire money, or someone who has global admin credentials. So there's a difference between an admin underperforming than a delivery driver underperforming. And it's important that we recognize this. What we're doing with most of our customers today, and if we haven't had this conversation with you and you're ready to, let's do that, because it's an important part of the maturity of the program, is starting to profile users by department, by frequency, by access, right? So if someone is your EMR administrator or your IT guy, or right, it could be a bunch of different things. If they have elevated or privileged access to certain things, we want to pay specific attention to them. And even in some cases, we have moved away from even reporting on low risk users, depending on how low, and really focusing on those high risk and medium risk individuals. So by their title, by their access, by their threat model, which means, hey, if I'm a CEO and my name is out there, or if I'm the head of communications and I'm on the news all the time, these are folks who are likely to be targeted more often. So it's not just what someone has access to internally, but it's also what types of threats is that individual likely to encounter. Marketing, constantly on Facebook and social media, where a lot of this stuff lives, or people doing research on websites. Just the function of their role may lead to greater exposure. So we want to do the math. So every role gets a weight, every classified protected asset gets a weight, and then we look at threat models and we start to say, hey, how do we really hone in on the places where we're truly at risk? So again, if your controller is constantly failing phishing tests, that's a big deal. You want to get on that immediately because the risk to you is so much higher than, again, Jim from customer success. We want to make sure that we're focusing in on that. So profiling your risk becomes important. And we also want to alter your cyberblasts, your dashboards. We want to show metrics that are relevant or most relevant to your organization. So if we are today, if everyone is getting lumped into the same risk profile and you're seeing one score, well, that may not be a representative score. That may not be a true illustration of your human risk in the organization. And so we want to continue to refine and tweak these. Going through a profiling exercise can really help you understand, hey, even though so-and-so is 6 months behind on the training and has failed the last 3 tests, I've got much bigger fish to fry. That person doesn't have access to anything, or just given the nature of their work, they're not exposed to the same types of threats that most people are. So let's get into profiling. That's critically important. But I think, for me, the most powerful thing you can integrate into your awareness program, your workforce security program, is your company values. And maybe you haven't identified these. You'll hear at OrbitalFire, we talk about them every day. Whether it's we're onboarding a new customer, our values are front and center. Also, our employees are living our values every day because everything from their performance evaluations to their email communications to you name it, virtually everything we have stitched our values into. And because of that, we are creating a culture where expectations, behaviors, and decision-making is all, not only is it clear to most people, I hope, but I think generally speaking, those values again become ambient. And if everyone's clear on what the expectations are, that almost undoubtedly will reduce your risk. So what are your values? For us, probably things that you would have guessed, like grit and efficiency and integrity and kindness. And when we think about the way we approach our awareness program, we need to make sure that we're practicing all of those things. Otherwise, there's going to be a misalignment. It's not going to feel right. It's not going to feel well integrated. So there may be a pre-step here, but if you are able to take the values that you've already built for your company, your organization, and weave those into everything you do from a workforce security perspective, that really drives it home. And for me, that's really the glue that makes these things really work. Okay, I've got a couple of final thoughts, and then we will pause for questions. And of course, you know where to find everyone, so we won't put anyone on the spot. So the first thing, again, I want to apologize for our industry. This term, the human firewall, is everywhere. We see it in every marketing slick, every presentation. It's on every conference banner. But the reality is there is no such thing. And in fact, humans and firewalls could not be more different. Firewalls are amazing. Like, you just program them. You just tell them what to do. And every single day, every minute, every second, they do exactly what you tell them to do. They don't get sick. They don't take vacations. They don't get upset with their supervisor or hang out at the water cooler all day. Like, they just do exactly what you tell them to do. That doesn't mean they're not vulnerable, but they are very, very predictable. They don't make decisions on their own. We make the decisions for them. That is the number one issue, is that people do make decisions on their own. They have their own beliefs. They have their own desires. They have their own opinions. They have their own lives. They have everything. They're completely organic, unreliable, unpredictable beings whose behaviors are very hard to program. And so when you see this, it gives me the chills when I see this anywhere. We have to reject this concept, this idea of the human firewall, because this really, honestly, has less to do with cybersecurity than it has to do with your people and your human resources. And maybe that's who should own your workforce security, cybersecurity program, is someone who understands people, who is with them every day, who has a high, emotional quotient and an emotional intelligence quotient, and is a good communicator and can help people recover or improve. Or it's sad that we don't have any psychologists in cybersecurity. And it's one of the biggest reasons that we have not made the progress that we had hoped in human behaviors, because the absolute farthest we can get from psychology is cybersecurity, or even worse, IT. Like, these are not people that are going to influence or motivate or incent or be good communicators, or like we're nerds attempting to solve a personal, emotional, cognitive problem, and it just does not work out well. So reject the human firewall. There is no such thing, and we need to stop treating people as computers and as something that we can just program. The last thing, though, is that the way you feel about cybersecurity can be different, and it almost always trumps the data. So recognize that there are two parts to cybersecurity. There's the reality of cybersecurity, and then there's how you feel about it. Because you can be secure and not feel that way, and you can be insecure even when you're not. And all of the examples that we kind of went through in the beginning are proof of this, right? No different than texting while driving, comparing that condition, that situation, to Osama bin Laden or sharks or vending machines. Like, our emotions, our feelings about security, and the reality of security don't always overlap. And so we need to make sure that as we're thinking about how to influence, motivate, incent our workforce to apply the skills that we've already given them, you're welcome, to take the 2 seconds, right, incent themselves, or to be motivated enough to take the 2 seconds out of their day to look at the sender's address, to practice good cybersecurity behaviors, regardless of what it is, to report incidents, to help their peers, to be part of the solution. We're going to have to trigger that limbic system. We're going to have to trigger their lizard brain. We're going to have to find a way to motivate them, because we've done a pretty good job, I'd say a very good job, in teaching skills and educating and training people. But what we don't do a very good job at is showing them how to be part of the solution, or incenting them in ways that intrinsically they want to do better. They want to be a winner. They want the gold star, and they're tired of being at the bottom of the stack. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I will take any questions, and normally with customers I don't get a lot, because hopefully we're talking about this on a regular basis and everyone has heard these discussions. But I'd love to take any questions. If not, you know where to find us and me. But I'll turn it back to you, Dana, to see if there's anything going on out there.
That's great. So as Reg said, if there's any questions, you can use the Q&A or the chat and let us know. And while we're waiting to see if anybody has any, just a reminder that we will send you this recording if you want to reference it later. And if you want to send it to others in your organization, this is going to be here for you. Well, great. Well, thank you to you as well, everybody that has joined us, and to Reg, and we'll look forward to talking with you all very soon.
Yeah, absolutely. I do appreciate it. And I think there's no more important conversation. If this is something you want to address or discuss in your next OCR, or you just want to have a conversation about it, please let us know. We're trying our best to make sure that we get this message out to our customers as well, but would love to hear from you. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Enjoy the sunshine.
Thank you.